Hey y'all, Jared Boland with Man Up Ministry Online. Tonight I want to talk about the verse of the day, which is Psalm 23:4. And this psalm is written by David. For those who don't know, yes, this is the same David who defeated Goliath as a boy and also then grew up to be king, among other things. And I want to talk about this psalm and the interestingness of how it's written and how it applies. So, first off, I think we need to take a moment to acknowledge who David was, and that is that before he became famous and practically a celebrity for killing Goliath and then eventually becoming king, he was a shepherd. So he spent his days and nights in total solitude, solely responsible for a flock of sheep or other livestock, and would have done so in the wilderness at the risk of all the wild beasts that live there. And it is well known, even from scripture, that some of the wild beasts that we're talking about that he would have run across included bears and lions. And David talks about having faced bears and lions and fought them to the death. And so when I think about the verse, in fact, let me say the verse real quick. It says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." So I think this is awesome to think about the person who wrote this, because the context of his life and what he experienced plays into the words that he uses. So when I think about the valley of death, I think about the fact that David was quite familiar with the risk of death. Quite literally, he knew what it meant to walk essentially in the risk or in the shadow of death being a legitimate possibility in his day-to-day actions. And so it says that even though he walks in the face of death, even though he is living a life where quite literally your next breath is not promised, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And, for David, the evil in that context was whatever would attack him or his flocks. So, again, those bears or lions or whatever might come his way. Maybe even, raiders or somebody who would have been willing to harm David to steal the livestock. But regardless, David was not afraid of the evil that he would encounter. Why? Because he says, "I will fear no evil because you are with me." His God was with him. He trusted and had a faith that no matter where he was, no matter what valley he was walking through, no matter what his circumstances were, and whatever evil he would encounter, he was not afraid to live life and to do what he needed to do, because he knew that his God that he served and loved was with him, would walk with him through those fires. And I think about our lives, right? And the things that we're facing, even the things we're facing today, and how many people would associate the valley of the shadow of death with this year, between COVID and some of the hardships and fears that we live with, and some of even the loss that people have had to live with. And then add on top of that the anxiety, the fear, the sadness, and the overwhelmingness of some of the protests and looting and things that have happened in the wake of the tragic death of George Floyd. There's just a lot being thrown at people this year, so much so that there's all these goofy memes out there. And we're walking through the valley of the shadow of death. This year did not promise anybody life. In fact, no year promises anybody life, but this year it feels more apparent that we're walking in a sinful world where life is not guaranteed. And it says, no matter what evil we face, whether that is sin, whether that is a pandemic, an earthly disease that could wreak havoc in our lives, whether that is injustice, in the world that is wreaking havoc in people's lives, particularly minorities, that puts people at risk or increases their risk of losing their life, whatever the case is, right? We face these enemies in our life no matter who you are. And Scripture tells us, and David is reminding us, that no matter what we face, no matter what we walk through, no matter what valley we're in, no matter what enemies try to take our lives, we can fear no evil because God is with us and He loves us and He's got everything under control. Now, this isn't necessarily a guarantee of safety. This isn't necessarily a promise of life. But what it is that God's saying, whether I choose to protect you in the valley today, or whether I choose to guarantee the fact that even if you die, I have got you for eternity, and you don't have to worry about what happens on the other side of death because I've taken care of that. God is saying that we can walk through those valleys, we can face these enemies with confidence because He is with us. And it ends by saying that your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now again, for David, this was a meaningful set of words or terminology, because David was familiar with these tools of his trade. The staff and the rod, which oftentimes gets misinterpreted as something that you would use as a weapon, and it could be. But the reality is that David had a flock that he cared for, much the way that God cares for us. And David would use his staff to guide his sheep in the right direction, or in other words, his will. If they started to veer off, he could pull them back in. If they needed to assist the sheep, for instance, in not taking a treacherous path, he could simply use the rod to steer them in an appropriate direction or a safe path. And David recognizes that part of how God operates in his life and in our life is that He uses this rod, the staff, to pull us back when we veer off and we're getting outside of God's will, to help to steer us in the right direction when we're really not sure which way to go. And when enemies do arise, and just like David in the field fighting lions and bears, when the enemies did arise, he would use his staff as a weapon to battle off the life-threatening dangers of the flock that he cared for and had authority over. And in that same way, David is reminding us that we can trust in the power of God's authority and staff, if you will, in our lives, so that He can redirect us when we are getting too concerned with our own will and our own ways, and we start to make sketchy choices, and we start to try and do silly things in life, and we take risks, and we go places and do things that we shouldn't do because we feel like we know what's best for our lives. And God is saying, you know what? My people, my flock, I'm looking out for them, even when they do stupid things. Let's be honest. Even when we are dumb sheep who veer off and wander off on our own, and we go down cliffs and cross dangerous rivers that really put us in harm's way, God is saying, I've got you. and I'm willing to guide you, and I'm willing to pull you back. I'm willing to leave the 99 to pursue the lost one, and I'm willing to fight off your enemies with the staff. God is our Redeemer. He is our shepherd. He is our comfort, and He is our strength. And the beauty of this verse, as David reminds us from his own experiences, is that we can trust that. God has got you, God had David, and God has us. I pray that as you are going through your own fires, you remember that tonight.
Hey, thanks for taking some time out of your busy day to give our channel a listen. Hopefully you liked the video. If you did, be sure and smash this button right here so that you can get access to all the latest content by subscribing to our channel, Man Up Ministry Online. And while you're at it, go ahead and hit this button right here and check out another video before you take off.